Hey everyone, this is Bathymetrics. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how the combination of Bitwig and Maschine by Native Instruments together make for a real kind of secret weapon for producers. Now, before I start, I know some of you are going, oh my gosh, this is like a 2-hour video. Am I really interested in this subject matter? And all I'm going to ask you to do is give me 5 or 6 minutes to hear a couple demos to show you what this video is going to teach you, the results you're going to be able to achieve yourself. And if you get through those demos and go, wow, I'd really like to learn how to do that, then by all means, keep going. And if not, no harm, no foul. Thanks for, trying to decide if this video is for you or not. What I'm going to show you is incredibly tedious and time-consuming to accomplish in every other DAW out there. But Bitwig has some unique features that make this type of workflow and results simple and elegant. So for those of you that are already familiar with Maschine or already have Maschine, let's get your attention first. Bitwig makes it incredibly fast and easy to transform from this basic pattern in Maschine itself to this set of mix-friendly and far more interesting audio stems that have been transposed to a different song key. Notice how literally every sound in this particular pattern has a much more dynamic and interesting set of rhythmic variation to it. Also, the kick and the snare have a different and heavier timbre than before. And of course, all of the melodic aspects of this have been transposed to a different song key. So you may be saying, yeah, but you can do that with Maschine in any DAW. My question to you is, can you do that in 5 minutes? Right? So that's kind of the power of Bitwig. And if you want to know how you make this radical set of changes so quickly, stick with the video. Okay, and now for those of you who aren't yet familiar with Maschine, this next part should get your attention. Maschine is pretty magic, and it's not because of the controller hardware that comes with Maschine. I mean, the pads on these are very nice and responsive, just like on the Ableton Push. But I'll be honest, my Maschine controller has been sitting in the closet since forever. I never use it. It's not on my desk. It's not what makes Maschine good to me. So it's not really the controller that makes Maschine worthwhile. To me, it's all of these expansions for Maschine. Over the years, they're now up to like more than 80 of these expansions. They're all cheap and bite-sized, although there's a lot of material in every expansion. It's extremely well curated, really well sound designed and mixed. And what makes these impressive is that you can mix and match the patterns and sounds either within a specific expansion or, mix and match across completely different expansions in very unique ways that are just way above and beyond any kind of traditional sample pack. Let me just show you these 5 kits and I'll play them one by one for you and kind of show you what they sound like as we stack and mix and match them. We'll start with this simple pattern. Let's add a couple more elements. All 5 of these kits running together by themselves with no mastering chain, just the raw mix straight out of Maschine, was already hitting -7 LUFS. These are well-designed, well-produced, well-balanced kits that you hardly have to mess with. And you could, like, it's a DJ's dream. All of these are effectively like royalty-free sample packs, right? And so as a DJ, I can just, dig around and put together any 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 kits and come up with really interesting beats like you just heard to use as like filler material in my live sets, or to sort of clear the palette and make good transitions that are very neutral and just percussion based between songs, like if I want to do a really major key change or tempo change. And it's a DJ's playground for sure, but it's also great source material for building up your own projects. Like, you're looking at 5 kits here. There's 16 sounds in each kit, and granted, in each one of these particular patterns I was playing for you, we weren't using all 16 sounds from each kit, but there's probably a total of 50 different tracks here that are all being blended together in real time, straight out of Maschine with no manipulation whatsoever. And it sounds freaking great. It's a 50-track project already, and I mean, this is just banging. So hopefully these 2 demos have gotten your attention and have motivated you to work your way through this fairly long video. So don't balk at the length of it. There is some detail here, but I've tried to break it up into bite-sized chunks, tackle everything very methodically, give you lots of demonstration, and you can move through it at your pace. You don't have to do it all in one sitting. Okay, so let's talk about the pros and cons of Maschine. It's a producer's secret weapon in a DAW like Bitwig, but it's really more like a producer's nightmare in most other DAWs. I really hated working with Maschine when I used Ableton. It was pretty much impossible to use Maschine in Studio One, but I love working with Maschine in Bitwig because Bitwig makes it so easy. Now, Maschine is amazing and awful all at the same time. It's amazing because of the endless mixing and matching and layering of patterns and sounds that you can do. 3 patterns from 3 different kits is basically 48 separate tracks you're potentially pulling together in super fast order, like I just demonstrated. The splice problem is non-existent. You don't have to worry about content ID or copyright flags or any of that stuff, because there's no way in heck you're going to come up with the same combinations that other producers will. And plus, it's so easy, especially with Bitwig, to add variation to the original patterns, change the sound of the original patterns, etc., really quickly and easily. So there's just no way you're ever going to duplicate what somebody else did. And that can be a big problem with fingerprinting on YouTube and Spotify and things like that. There's, like I pointed out, there's more than 80 expansions and still growing. Regular expansions come out all the time. There's a ton of stuff in hip hop, house, and techno genres. There's a lot of trap, jungle, UK drill, UK garage, mid-tempo bass, or EBM, depending on what you want to call it. Acid, trance, electronica. It's just everything, right? And all the sounds are pro-quality sound design. Every sound has a lot of effects you can tweak. Like if we look at any one sound here, like this one bass line, there's the sampler that's playing the bass line, and then there's a maximizer, there's a beat delay, and that's all. If we go to this tambourine, is there anything on that? There's a reverb on this tambourine. There's a saturator and a beat delay on this clave, and so on and so forth, all up the line. Like every track has its individual effects, sends, or inserts, right? And then the entire group has, the group is like a bus. And so at the group level, we've got some effects with names like FM and ICE. Those are specific effects to the native instruments Maschine ecosystem, if you will. And then a beat delay and a maximizer. And so that's why, for example, by the time I pulled all of these tracks together, it was very loud too, right? It was competitively loud for the dance genres. So tons and tons of effects are part of what add to the uniqueness. And you can modify these, control these, toggle them on and off. If it's an instrument making a sound, like, for example, with Monarch, right? You can actually open up Monarch and tweak the patch if you want, right? So it's not a hard-baked sample pack. It's a playable instrument. It's a DAW within a DAW. These are all the things that make Maschine amazing. Now, what makes Maschine awful? The VST or plugin itself requires a lot of system resources, so it's not really practical to just throw it into your regular project with all your other stuff, or you're just going to run out of CPU. Also, there's no good way to use any kind of outside MIDI or automation or modulation to mute and unmute the different combinations of kits like you saw me doing in real time, or to mute and unmute different sounds. There's no way to automate that. Certainly no easy way to automate that. So you're pretty much limited to what you can dynamically play in real time on the hardware controller, turning patterns on and off at the right real-time human timing. And it's just like, it's a good performance instrument, but it's not a very good production instrument because it's very difficult to integrate this into your projects in a real-time way, playing things out of Maschine itself, right? So even if you could feasibly put the Maschine VST inside of a bigger project and use it like any other synth or sampler in your project, even if it wasn't a resource hog, the pattern melody editing and transposing inside of their piano roll is just a horrid experience. These are tiny. You can't use arrow keys to move notes around. You have to literally drag and move them with your mouse pointer. And trying to do it on the hardware itself isn't much easier. I mean, you have to remember all these weird button and key combinations to press with your fingers. You have to train your muscle memory. And even then it's slow. It's one sound at a time, one pattern at a time, scrolling back and forth to find the range you want to modify or to select a range of notes, right, on the hardware controller to transpose them up or down or nudge them left or right or whatever. It's just like really slow and awkward. And then finally, every kit is in its own key. A lot of them are in the key of C, like most of them are probably in the key of C. And that's a terrible key for most club and festival music. It's too low for the sub arrays to be able to reproduce very well. So for most of their basic kits, a lot of which are in C, you have to transpose them up or down to something a little more playable like D or E or F. So you're always having to like modify the melodic elements of these kits, and then it gets even worse. A lot of the drum elements in any given kit are actually very tonal and pitched. It's part of what makes the sound design so interesting. They're not just atonal percussions, they're percussions that have like a strong tonal element to them, a strong pitch element to them. And they're all tuned out of the box in key with the rest of the kit. And so it's not just a matter of, say, transposing a bass line or an ARP. You also have to transpose the MIDI for a lot of the drum and percussive elements so that they're kind of tuned up or down to match. And it's just really slow and tedious and laborious, right? So these are all the things that just make Maschine really hard to work with in its intended way with the hardware controller, and certainly in any other DAW. Okay, so let's talk about why Bitwig in particular makes it especially easy to work with Maschine. Bitwig has this very wide variety of note effects devices that are unparalleled. No other DAW has as many different ways to mess around with MIDI notes. A lot of them are utility things like filtering and transposing and mapping of notes from one channel to another, or just all kinds of stuff. I can't even begin to cover all the note effects There's also interesting grouping devices that let you layer different note effects together, or jump between them and select between completely different types of note effects, these white colored things, right? So I'm using some of these capabilities to make sure that the MIDI I play out of Bitwig itself is being routed to the correct channel by the time it hits Maschine, and I can have different MIDI clips on a set of tracks underneath this group bus. And then this little device here is basically grabbing the individual MIDI notes from all these different tracks, pulling them together into one layered stream of MIDI across 16 different channels and sending them into the Bitwig device. So this makes it really easy to just drag the MIDI for a given pattern out of Maschine, drop it into Bitwig along these 16 tracks, and then I can modify the MIDI on my side in Bitwig in a much better piano roll with a lot more capability and faster editing than trying to, laboriously go into this tiny little window and select a sound and go to the MIDI view for that sound and then try to carefully and laboriously change this MIDI pattern in this terrible, terrible interface, right? I don't have to do that. I just drag it all out of Maschine into Bitwig, and then I can work with the MIDI in Bitwig itself. Show you a couple things that are going on with the snare drum, right? This is the main snare in this pattern. So we've got this simple pattern that has just snares on the backbeat, 2, 4, 2, 4, right? I dragged this in and then I modified it a little bit, right? I left the strong beats at 2 and 4, 2 and 4. I also made this a little bit longer, and I just added some extra notes for some syncopated interest. When I play the pattern in Maschine itself, it sounds like this. But if I play it out of Bitwig, it's going to sound like this. Right? It's different every time because some of these extra notes I added at syncopated places in the pattern, I assigned some probability to. So that's the first cool thing that Bitwig has that a lot of other DAWs don't. Bitwig has other fun tricks like this thing called repeats. It's another type of operator. This is just a single snare hit on the last beat of the bar, but it's very common every 4 or 8 bars to have some sort of turnaround figure. And it's very common to do a turnaround figure on the snare. So we could put a flam or a roll on here. And that's what this repeats operator is. So if I turn this on, and this gets these little hash marks on it, this means there's some sort of repeat behavior on here. And if we listen to it now, listen to this last note. Right? So now we've got a roll. And it's not just a simple roll. You can weight the hits and change the feel and timing of them with this little slider here. Like now I'm going to rush the roll. Right? See how now it sounds like more of a spat? And then you could make it more notes, less notes, all kinds of values. Let's make it a simple flam, and let's make it kind of a lazy flam. Drag it over this way a little bit. Right? Just a little lazy military flam, kind of. So there's all these different feels you can get with just one little operator. So probability and repeat are really strong tools for quickly and rapidly making these original patterns your own, different from straight out of the sample pack. And it just literally just takes a matter of minutes to do this kind of modifying. Another thing you can do that's pretty cool that I think is unique to Bitwig, there might be one or two other DAWs that have something like this, but we're looking at the kick pattern, and we're looking at this device called Replacer, which is a native device to Bitwig. There's third-party VSTs that do this. You know, it's very common in recorded drums to use some technique to layer on a drum sample. And there can be third-party VSTs that do this, but Bitwig just has this native replacer. And so if I turn this on and off, here's the original kick sound. Which is a little boring. Let's fatten it up a little bit. So what I'm using to do that is this replacer device, which is like a specialized envelope follower. You can set a threshold, and every time something pokes above the threshold, it spits out a MIDI key. That's all it does. And it sends this MIDI key to whatever's inside its generator slot. And in this case, I put on an e-kick device, which is a Bitwig electronic kick, and just tuned it and set some properties and fattened it up and just added this secondary layer on top of the boring little pokey kind of kick that's here. Right? And I did the same thing for the snare. Let's bring the snare in, which isn't bad, but now let's add this. It's not like the best snare sound in the world, but I wanted to do something that was noticeably different from the original pattern. So here's the original kick and snare coming out of the pattern in Maschine. Totally different kick and snare feels to anchor down this rhythm, but I didn't do it by like setting up a drum machine and dragging in a bunch of different drum samples and finding drum samples that worked well together and blending the samples till they sounded just right. Instead, I just threw on this replacer device, got it triggering, threw on, you know, any one of Bitwig's e-drum devices, which look like these here, right? And played around with the tuning and fatness and thickness and noise addition and mix, and, you know, just tweaked a couple knobs by ear until I thought, okay, that sounds okay. And you have a whole different sound, right? So these are the kind of things that are unique to Bitwig. Other DAWs just don't have some of these things, and very few DAWs have something like this. And I could drastically and radically make the original samples my own. It'll never trigger Content ID, never be confused with like, oh, I heard that in a Maschine expansion, right? Because it doesn't sound like the Maschine expansion anymore. This whole scene, let's turn all these on again. Right, that's playing from my samples that I took, my stems that I took, versus what's coming out of Maschine originally. Right, the balance is different, the rhythms are very different, there's a lot more variation and complexity, timbres of sounds are different, and then I could go even one step farther, and let's throw on Infiltrator and also throw on one of Bitwig's very unique modulators, which is another thing no other DAW has is this set of crazy modulators you can throw on anything. In this case, I've got this steps modulator ping-ponging back and forth through a sequence, and it's affecting macro number 2 in Infiltrator, this macro right here, and it's going to totally change this bass sound. So without Infiltrator, it sounds like this. But then if I add Infiltrator plus this Bitwig modulator, it sounds like this. Right? A few minutes worth of work, completely different sound. I didn't have to do any manual chopping, cutting, editing, running it through some resampling rack, adding a bunch of, cram it through OTT and a bunch of things people typically do to mess up sample pack sounds so they don't sound like they came from the sample pack. Just really quick and dirty stuff that's just easy and fast to do in Bitwig itself. So these are some of the ways that I think that Bitwig really helps you just quickly take anything from Maschine and make it your own. And then finally, the last thing about Bitwig that's very cool, and now Ableton does have this, Ableton's the other DAW that has this, is this whole idea of a launcher view, right? You've got two different timelines in Bitwig. You have your standard arranger timeline, but then you also have this clip launcher timeline. And it's very easy to use this not only to sort of test different combinations of sounds in a given column, and then have that as a scene that you could literally like take this entire combination of clips and just drag them right over and drop them in your timeline. And then you could scroll to a different scene and scroll a little further in the timeline over here and then say, okay, now I want to take these clips over and use them next, right? You can set up your combinations here in these columns, and then once you've tested how they sound and you say, yeah, this is a good rough outline for my song sections, you can then just drag them over bit by bit into the timeline just by dragging these things, right? And so you can set up your basic sequencing arrangement in a super fast snap. But even more than that, you can also have all of these clips kind of sitting in a bunch of other scenes over here. Storage, and actually a faster way to do this is just dupe out one called storage, so DDDD, right? So I've got a bunch of storage columns now, and I've made these stems, and I can just literally copy them over into these storage columns. No matter how I mix and match these things and start playing with different scenes to do what I want to do, I can just constantly have this library of my original stem clips. And this is a really handy feature of both Bitwig and Ableton, but it's very nice that we have this in Bitwig because you can just make tons of stems, and then you can just create this library of clips, and then you can be creating more and more scenes over here, like, doop. I've got scene 7, 8, 9, and I could start saying, okay, well, what happens if I try this kick and this escape? What if I do, I have to make sure I just only select one. This kick, that other snare, maybe these tops, stop that. These tops from this chunk and this bass line from this chunk, right? Actually, this was here, so let's put that there. So what does this sound like if I want to combine these things? And then you can just launch it and test it and say, yeah, that sounds good. And now I've got a new scene that I could potentially drag into, just drag it right over and add it as my next section, right? And so on and so forth. So super fast workflow that Bitwig allows. And this one particular piece, Ableton also allows, but not some of the other cool things I showed you. Okay, so now we're going to pivot to the how-to part of this video. To explain how we're going to set up Bitwig and Maschine to work together in a really fast and simple workflow manner, I think it's important to first just review some things about Maschine itself. So Maschine is a DAW inside your DAW. It's kind of like Reason Rack. Every different kit in any given expansion has 16 sounds inside of it, and the kits are loaded inside of something called groups. And every time you create a new group, it gets a new color and an identifier like A1, B1, C1, etc. Each group, each of these is effectively like a bus within the Maschine DAW. And then every sound inside of a group is effectively its own track inside that bus. And then every kit has multiple patterns that each comprise individual MIDI clips for each sound. And the MIDI for each of these sounds is spread across channels 1 through 16. So for example, sound number 3 is on MIDI channel 3. Sound number 9 is on MIDI channel 9, and so on. Okay, so let's talk about muting and soloing. This is a key part of workflow when you're using Maschine with Bitwig, because you're going to test combinations of sounds and combinations of kits and combinations of patterns by muting things on and off and soloing things on and off. So the basic idea is you left-click something to mute it and unmute it. Let's go down to a kick. I'm going to mute this kick and snare. I just left-click them and now they're muted. If I left-click these again, I unmute them. And then you right-click to solo. So if I want to just hear the kick in this pattern, I right-click it, and now it's the only thing that's bright. Everything else has been muted. If I want to solo a different thing like the open hi-hats, I click that, and now that's the only thing I'm hearing. If I want to unsolo, I just right-click it again, and now everything's back. Same thing for kits. If I want to solo this kit, I right-click it, and now that's the only kit and the only pattern I'm hearing. If I want to solo this kit, I right-click it, and this is the only kit and pattern I'll be hearing. And then if I want to, I can unmute some other things by left-clicking them, and now I'm hearing them in combinations. Okay, so now let's talk about how to actually set up both Bitwig and Maschine to enable the type of workflow I've been demonstrating, and some additional workflow I'll be showing you in a bit. We're going to focus on setting up the Maschine group and tracks and the instance of Maschine on that group itself. I'm not going to talk about what you see here under audio stems yet. We'll get to that in the next segment of the video. And we're going to do this in a brand new project just to keep things nice and simple. We have 3 different goals for our setup in Bitwig. Our first goal, we want to make sure that we have 16 different MIDI tracks onto which we can be putting clips that are originally exported out of Maschine, or clips that we build ourselves from scratch, just putting in MIDI for this and that, right? And we want all these to be able to drive Maschine properly, right? That's one of our goals. So collect all those 16 tracks into 16 different channels of MIDI and pass that along to Maschine. Our second goal is to ensure that any MIDI clips that we manually create in Bitwig itself are always sent to the correct channel in Maschine. So again, if I manually create a clip and start editing it, I want to make sure that this clip goes to the right MIDI channel to trigger sound number 8 in Maschine. And then our third goal is to make it fast and easy, instantly pitch any specific selection of MIDI clips up or down and just transpose them on the fly just by flicking a knob around, using little buttons to decide which of these MIDI clips actually get transposed. So let's talk about how we do this from scratch. It's a real easy setup. We're just going to take it step by step. So the first thing you want to do is start with a single track. Rename this to MIDI 1. And then on that track, you want to put a device called channel map. Looks like this. And we're just going to start with that, and we're going to dupe this out 16 times. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Then we want to rename these tracks to be MIDI 2. And I'll pause here while I name all these. Okay, so we have all these tracks named MIDI 1 through MIDI 16. Next thing we want to do is walk through each of these tracks and set up the channel mapping, which is very simple. The basic idea is to ensure that if MIDI ever comes into a track on channel 1, it gets forwarded to the correct MIDI port to match the track number. So we want MIDI 1 to be channel 1, MIDI 2 to be channel 2, MIDI 3 to be channel 3, and so on. So we just walk down the line. We'll start with MIDI 2. We're just going to take this first slot here and click it and drag upward until it says 2. Go here to MIDI 3, set this to MIDI 3, and so on and so forth. Let me do that for all the tracks. Be right back. All right, so you can do a quick double check by selecting track 1 and just watching here. Use your down arrow, walk through all the tracks. So track 1 goes to channel 1, track 2 goes to channel 2, 3 goes to 3, 4 goes to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, okay? So again, what this means is if I'm on track 9 and I create my own MIDI track, my own MIDI clip, and I start, setting up some sort of arrangement, you'll notice that by default, when you create a new clip in Bitwig, it always goes to channel 1 right here. And what we're trying to avoid is having to come over here and remember, oh, this is on track 9, so I want to manually set this to go out to channel 9. We don't want to have to do this manual editing because you're going to forget, right? So instead, we just set it up so that, if I'm on channel 7 or track 7, and I've got a MIDI clip here, and I put MIDI into it, and even though the MIDI clip itself by default is sending to channel 1, what's really happening under the covers is anything that comes in on channel 1 gets pushed out to channel 7, okay? So that's how we set up these individual tracks. The next thing we're going to do is put them in a group. So I'm going to select them all and do Control G. And now they're inside of a group. We're going to name this group something like Machine or Machine Lab or whatever you want to call it, right? And on this group, we're going to put Machine. Okay, so we've got Machine here. And the next thing we need to do is accomplish our first goal, which is to make sure that any MIDI that comes in through any of these 16 tracks gets grouped together and sent into Machine as one big batch of multi-channel MIDI from channel 1 through 16, okay? So we're going to collect all these, and we're going to do that by working on the Machine track itself. We're going to add something called Note FX Layer, this device right here. And this is just a layering device, but it's specifically for Bitwig note effects. Okay, and the first thing we're going to put on there is a note receiver device, which is pretty unique to Bitwig. I don't think many other DAWs have anything like this. And then right after the note receiver, we're going to click this blue plus sign and put in a note transpose device. So that looks like this one here. So we have a single channel in this Note FX layer, and it's like a MIDI channel. It's for MIDI data only. That's what these squares mean. We're going to rename this to channel 1, CH1, okay? And since this is channel 1, what we want to do is grab any MIDI that's coming or playing on track MIDI 1, and we want to, send it through. So we're going to go to the Source tab and say Machine Lab, MIDI 1, MIDI 1, and look for the thing with the square. This means with the symbol and the square, it means you're grabbing the MIDI data and you're routing the MIDI data over into this note receiver. And just for good measure, you probably want to turn off this input mute. You just don't want to bother muting any input MIDI on this channel. It's not important. So now we have a single channel pulling its MIDI from track number MIDI 1. And it's going to push it through this thing called Note Transpose, which is neutral right now and not doing any transposition. This is something we're going to use for that third goal later of pitch shifting on demand with just twisting a knob and pressing some buttons. And then all that information is getting passed through to Machine, okay? So now that we've set up that basic channel, we're going to select it and duplicate it out 16 times. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And then again, let's go through and name all these channel 1 through 16. Be right back. Okay, so now we have channels 1 through 16 set up. They all have this note receiver and note transpose because we dupe those out with each one. Now we're going to set each channel to go to pull from its respective MIDI track. So this is channel 2. We want to pull this from MIDI 2. Channel 3, we pull from MIDI 3. 4, we pull from MIDI 4. And so on down the line. Be right back. Okay, so we should be able to do the same trick where we select one channel and just use our arrow key to walk through them all. We want to watch this number match the channel as we go down. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay, so now we have this single note effects layer that's collecting all the MIDI from all these different tracks at the same time, bundling them together and sending them all in parallel on channels 1 through 16 straight over to Maschine. And they're all passing through a little note transpose device that's specific to each channel. So that's the next part of our setup. And this is for our third goal, to make it very easy to quickly transpose the pitch of any MIDI clip that we have, and we can selectively choose which of those clips to transpose and which of them to not transpose just by clicking a few buttons. So the button part's easy. We're going to set that up first. First, you want to open up your remote control page, and we're going to create 3 empty remote control pages, and we'll give them a name like, we'll hold Alt and click that and call this one something like pitch A, or you can call it transpose A, right? Call this one transpose B. We'll call this one transpose C. All right, so now we have our 3 pages. We can close this down, and we're going to go back up to our first page A, and we're going to leave this first slot blank because we're going to put the knob here that rolls our pitch up and down. We're instead going to start with this slot right here. And it's worth remembering that in Maschine, we bring it back over here, in any given Maschine pattern, the drum sounds and the percussive sounds usually start on channel 1 and work all the way down. The main kick and the main snare are always on channel 1 and 2. Channels 3 through like 10, 11, and 12 are usually top layer sounds like percussions and cymbals and weird little bleeps and bloops and clanks and blops. And then it's usually the last 4 tracks, sometimes more, sometimes less, that are the melodic instruments in the kit. And they're going to be your synths with actual riffs and melodies and bass lines, arpeggios and plucks and things like that. So the sounds you tend to want to pitch transpose most often are at the end. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with channel 16 and work backward so that those buttons we want to transpose most often are right up front on the very first transpose A page, right? So let's go through this process. This is very fast. We're going to scroll down here and select channel 16. Here's the first button we want to map to, and we're just going to click this and then click the on-off button, and now we have a button that says on-off, right? And now we want to remind ourselves what this one is, just to kind of anchor ourselves. I'll call this pitch 16, right? And so what this button does is if it's on, then any kind of transposition I do in this device, it's active and it will happen to the underlying MIDI clip that might be down here on track 16. But if it's off, then this device is off, and so the MIDI passes through. And even if I have a dial that's transposed things up or down by semitones or whatever, it'll be unaffected because the device is just off for channel 16 here, right? So that's channel 16. Let's go do the other buttons. We're going to switch to channel 15, click this, then we're going to go to channel 14 and assign that one. I'm going to go to channel 13 and assign that one. 12 and assign that one, and so on and so forth down the line. And then we're going to rename these to be pitch 15, pitch 14, and so on. So in the interest of time, I'll pause this and just go do all that real quick. Be right back. Okay, so you can double check all these by going to the appropriate channel, clicking the button on and off, making sure you see this go on off accordingly. Channel 15, right? That button's working. Channel 14, and so on, all the way up and down the line. And, I've already checked those. So I've got 16 through 10. On the next page down, it's 9 through 2. And on the last page, I've got pitch 1. And again, you hardly ever change the kick drum. You hardly ever change the snare drum. You might change some of the percussion and top layers. And you're very often changing 16, 15, 14, 13, and 12, because these often have melodic tonal sounds on them. So that's why they're good here. Okay, so now that we've got this done, now we get to do the fun part, which is setting up a pitch knob that will automatically shift this note transpose device up or down by a certain number of semitones just by twiddling a knob. And we're going to do that with Bitwig's modulators, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about this because, anyone who's really following this part of the video should have Bitwig and knows how a lot of these modulators work. What we're going to do is bring in a macro modulator, which is just a knob. And the advantage of a macro modulator is you can assign it to multiple different things, and it's one knob. If I were to try to use this to control a knob, like let's say I used this remote control to adjust the fine tuning knob of this first note transpose device in channel 1, well, sure, now I can do fine tuning of this knob, see how it's wiggling. But this is just a one-to-one assignment. I can't then also assign this same knob to the same fine-tuned knob in a different note receiver, right? Just can't be done. So that's what macro knobs are for, because these you can assign to multiple different targets. So I'm going to open this up and get rid of this knob entirely. And then we're going to leave it blank for now. We've got a basic macro knob. And the first thing we want to do is set it to a unipolar state. So this will be minus 0 to 100, and this side will be plus 0 to 100, right? Double click to put it back exactly at center. And now we're going to walk through, we're going to create the next thing we need to do, which is add a quantize modulator. And this is a special modulator. If you click it to open up its settings, it's a thing that will take however much the input knob turns, and then it quantizes it into certain stepped output values. So this is like input, this is output, and you can set a resolution on this output. So right now, this is set to an output of a resolution of 1.66. So watch as I turn it upward from center. I get about that far and it jumps up one blip. And if I go a little further, it doesn't do anything else. It only jumps one step from center. And if I go downward, it only jumps one step from center, but no more. Well, that's because of the way the math works for this thing. So here's the basic idea. If you want to have 4 discrete steps, you set any kind of value between 4 and 5 on the resolution knob. If I set it to any value between 1 and 2, like even if I set up to like 1.91 and I push this knob up, it's only going to jump upward one time. It never jumps a second time, right? But as soon as I take this resolution and push it just over 2, now it'll jump twice. There's the first jump, and there's the second jump, okay? So ask yourself how many semitones you want to be able to go up or down from your target position. You could choose 6, you could choose 7. I use 7 only because of the way the math works out. If I'm in if I've got a MIDI clip that's in the key of C and I want to transpose it downward to the key of F, I want to go 7 semitones downward. And F is a very common key for the kind of music I produce. It's one of the safest keys. So for me, 7 semitone jumps is useful because I can go downward an octave to the F below C, or I can push 5 semitones upward to the F above C. And that way I can get to either a higher F or a lower F if my original pattern coming out of Maschine is a melody in the key of C, for example. So I just picked 7 because of those reasons, but you can pick anything you want. So what I'm going to do is just Control-click the resolution knob and set 7.1. Any value over 7 will give me 7 jumps. And now watch, if I go first, there's 1 jump, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right? And I have 7 jumps in both directions. I have 7 exact steps. So now what I'm going to do is assign this macro knob to this input knob and push it up by a value of exactly 1. Now, shortcut for people who aren't used to Bitwig is don't try to hit the exact value here because it'll drive you crazy. Just get close to what you want and then let go. And then come over here, like select the container device that you're setting up the macros on, and just come over here and adjust the value right here. So instead of 0.98, I want this to be exactly 1. So I'm going to Control-click this and type 1 and hit Enter. And now this is a 1-for-1 mapping of this macro knob to this input for the quantize. And now I have 7 discrete steps below center and 7 discrete steps above center. And now it's safe to map this shortcut knob or remote control knob to this macro knob. And again, I have 7 steps upward and I have 7 steps downward. And I'm going to change the label of this to pitch plus minus. And that also changes the label over here. So now I have my pitch knob. I have my buttons that turn these transpose devices on and off. And now the last thing I have to do is assign this quantized pitch to the semitone control on each of these note transpose devices. So let's walk through that. First thing I'm going to do is make sure all these buttons are off, because by default, I don't want to transpose anything. So let's walk through here and turn all these off. Right? And then I'll go back up to page 1. I'll start with pitch 16. I'm going to scroll down to channel 16, and I'm going to take this modulator and activate it. So I'm going to take the quantized output with 7 values above 0 and 7 values below 0, and then a center value. And I'm just going to click the semitone box and drag upward to a value of 7. All right, now again, you can hold shift and try and get exactly on 7, but trust me, it's a nightmare, so don't bother. Just get close to 7 or anything at all, really. Let go and forget about it for now, right? Then just go to channel 15. Now we're looking at the transpose device for channel 15, and just push upward on this semitone box again. 14, push upward on the semitone box. 13, push upward. 12, up. 11, up. 10, up. 9, up. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. You only want to touch the semitones, nothing else here. All right, so we've assigned it. We can click this blue thing to stop it from flashing. And now, again, go to the parent layer, the parent container where the macros are. And now we can see all those values I just assigned. And they're all different numbers. And now I'm just going to go make all of them be exactly 7 semitones, right? So Control click, 7, Control click, 7, and let's see. Will Bitwig let me multi-select? No, it won't. So I got to do these one by one. Be right back. Okay, so now every one of these assignments to the semitone field on note transpose is set to exactly 7 semitones. It's being fed by this knob, which jumps in increments of exactly 7 above or 7 below. And we're pretty much done with all this mapping. Now let's just test it real quick. So we'll try this on pitch number 16. Go to channel 16, enable the note transpose device. Now, we're going to pull the semitone down until we see one little blue dot. See that dark blue dot right in the corner there up here? That's one semitone. Drag it down again. I have 2 blue dots here. That's 2 semitones. 3, 4, 5, 6, and finally 7. I have a total of 7 dark blue dots here, meaning I've gone down 7 semitones. Double click to snap it back to center. Let's go up 1. A little bright blue dot at the bottom. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So I have a range of 7 below and 7 above, and this is taking place on any device that I may have activated for pitch, right? So if I look at channel 15, pitch is off, this transpose device is off, so anything going through this channel will not be transposed. But if I go to channel 14, we can see that, I've got a 2 semitone jump there, and back here on channel 16, I have a 2 semitone jump, and here on channel 12, I have a 2 semitone jump. But other channels like 13 are just off and no jump, right? 15 is off, 10 is off, and so on. But if I just turn channel 10 on, well, now I've got my 2 blue dots, meaning it's going up by 2 semitones. Okay, so this is how you do this mapping. And then you can close up the shortcuts. You can reset all these to off as a default state. Double click this back to center, and now you're in kind of a default state. And you can even collapse the channels because you don't really need to see those inserts anymore that are on each channel. Everything's mapped, everything's done. This part's ready to go. So we have completely set up Bitwig to accomplish all 3 of our goals. We have 16 MIDI tracks. They're all being collected by the note receiver on each of these channels. They're all being sent in parallel as 16 different channels of MIDI data into Maschine. And each channel, each track, is passing through a note transpose device that we can selectively turn on and off and transpose the pitch for, up or down by a certain amount of semitones. That's it. That's it for the Bitwig side. So now, let's talk about the Maschine setup so that Maschine will play whatever MIDI clips we have here correctly. The Maschine part's a lot easier. Let's bring Maschine over. So the first thing you want to make sure of is in your browser panel, you have disabled this button that says routing. Make sure it's not bright. It needs to be disabled. And also make sure this little weird button here is not white, but it's turned off and dim and gray. So what this little button does here, without any label on it, is it affects what happens when you preview a kit. And by that, I mean you can select any specific expansion you want, and you can just click on a kit. And you get a short little preview. Gives you an idea of what that kit's about. And then if you want to load that kit, you double click it, and it loads up in whichever group you currently have selected. Now that's the behavior you want. You want to not accidentally mess up your existing groups just because you went and auditioned various kits to see if it was a sound you wanted to bring in and play with, right? If this button is on and it's enabled with this white color, well, here's what happens when you try to preview a kit. You get about 2 seconds of sound, and then it just automatically loads the kit. It's meant to be helpful, but it's not very helpful, so my advice is keep it off. Now the routing button does something different. Every kit has a set of default input and output routings, and also some macro controls and some groove controls. And these inputs and outputs could be audio and MIDI, right? And this is for every sound in the kit has its own individual audio and MIDI inputs and outputs. And then the entire group as a whole, if I click this group button right here, it also has some group level inputs and outputs. And so if this button is on, every time you load up a kit from the browser, it's going to completely overwrite whatever routings you have manually set up for a group. It's just going to overwrite them with whatever's default in the kit. And you don't want that. You want to set up these routings one time and forget about them, right? So we're going to start with one kit, any kit. It's not important which kit. It doesn't even have to be loaded. I mean, I could just remove this entirely, and now it's just an empty group. But what we're going to do is we're going to set up on this group, which remember is like a bus, and we're going to set up the routings for it. And you're going to want all the default routings with the exception of your input MIDI routings. Okay, so what I mean by that is at the group level, there is an input MIDI that's not important at the group level. What we want to do is make sure that these 12 tracks, which are all being fed to the machine on 16 different channels, we want to make sure that each sound in the group, so we're going to click the sound tab, we're going to make sure each sound from 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on is responding to the MIDI coming out of Bitwig, which is the host in this case, right? So we're going to start with sound 1. We're going to go to input because we want to affect what machine hears on its input to each sound. We're going to go over to the MIDI tab. We're going to set this to host and this to channel 1. So sound 1 will only respond to what's coming in on channel 1 from the host, which is Bitwig. Now we're going to do the same thing for sound 2. Host and 2. Sound 3, host, and 3, and so on and so forth. Let me go set all those up and I'll be right back. Okay, so let's check and make sure these all look good. We're going to start with sound 1, host 1, host 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. All right, now we've set up the routing for one group. Now what we want to do is copy this group 3 or 4 or 5 times. I like to have 5 slots to work with by default. I usually don't stack up more than 5 different kits at a time, but usually 1 or 2 isn't enough, and I find I want to add a 3rd or 4th. And here's the deal. If I just create a new group by clicking the plus button, by default, it's got all the default mappings. See, my input sound MIDI is now back to default all on every single channel. That's not what we want. We want these to say, you know, host 8, host 7, and so on for each individual channel. So you can't just click the plus button to create new groups. That's important to remember. Instead, if you want to create a new group and make sure it has all the right mappings, what you have to do, and unfortunately there's not a dupe command. You can't right click on this and do duplicate. Oh, how I wish you could, but you can't. So instead, what you do is create a new empty group that has the wrong bad default mappings in it, but then right click on the first group that has the mappings set up, copy that. Now right click on the new group with the bad mappings and just do paste. And when you do that, suddenly the new group has all the correct mappings again, right? So whatever you set up on that first group, you can just copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste as many times as you want. So what I'm going to do is create 3 more groups and paste right over them. Paste, and 1 more. Paste, okay? So I have 5 groups, all with the right mapping already set up. Every group, no matter what sound I hit, sound 12 is going to be reading channel 12 from my host if I have a MIDI clip here that's playing. Okay, so now let's talk about loading kits, because we're gonna load up the first group with a kit. You can select a group that has the correct routings in it already, and you can either double click the name of the kit and it will load, but it will maintain all the correct routings, right? Or you can take a kit and drag it onto one of your existing groups that already has the routing set up. And if I let go, it'll load it up. Again, this kit's selected now. We're looking at this kit. You can see all the routings are still correct. So let's hear pattern 1 from this kit. Pattern 2. Let's just briefly show, I'm going to come back to this later in a little more detail, but just briefly show you why we go to all this trouble of the routing and mapping. So this particular pattern has most of the tracks set up correctly. Well, it's using most of the tracks is what I'm trying to say. And we're going to copy the MIDI from this pattern over into Bitwig and just kind of show you what this ends up looking like. So I'm going to collapse all the tracks just to make it easy to see all of them in one go. And we're going to make this a little smaller so we can see more of Bitwig, right? So we've got pattern 1 selected in kit number 1, and we're just going to come over here to this little button right here, which is the MIDI drag. And we're going to click on it, bring it over here, and just drop it on slot number 1 for MIDI track 1, and then let go. And what happens is Bitwig's being careful not to overwrite clips that might already be in place, so it actually adds all of this multi-MIDI below your 16 tracks. And that's fine, because we're just going to multi-select these 16 clips. We're going to scroll up and just drag them up onto the tracks they actually belong. And then we're going to select these, temporary tracks that it made, and we're just going to delete them. And now we have this exact pattern represented by these MIDI clips here. And if we expand this out, you're going to see that some of them have MIDI data on them and some of them are empty, like this one's empty. We click it, there's nothing in here. And you can also tell it's empty. I'm sorry, there is something in there. Something in there. Where are you? There you are. 2 little hits at the end. Let's find one that is empty. Wow. Are these all populated? Well, very cool. I guess this pattern is using every track. Let's see. Yeah. Now it's more obvious. Every single track seems to have some MIDI events on it, so that's cool. Perfect example. If a track were empty, like, let me just shuffle this over to the side for a minute and create a completely blank clip, right? You can always tell if a clip is empty because this bottom half of the inspector will be blank, right? A track that has MIDI data has this notes section. It says there's 15 notes on this clip, and here's some data about those notes, right? If a clip's empty, this is also empty. So that's an easy way after you've dragged a bunch of, patterns over. You can just kind of walk through these until you come across one that's empty. And then you can say, oh, that's empty, I don't need it. And you can just delete it. And then it's more obvious which tracks actually have data on them. But let's put this one back here. And in this case, every single track has data. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn off the pattern in Maschine itself. And now Maschine is just a dumb sampler. It's waiting for MIDI to drive it. And the MIDI is going to come from Bitwig now. So we got a kick here, right? Here's our kick pattern. Here's our snare pattern. Here's our closed hi-hat pattern, and so on down the line, right? So if we play it from Bitwig, all the MIDI's coming out of Bitwig. And if you want to solo anything, or like let's solo the kick, even though all the MIDI tracks are playing, and all this MIDI is going in on channels 1 through 16 and hitting Maschine and firing everything. We've soloed inside of Maschine just the kick drum, so now we're just going to hear the kick. Let's add in the snare. Add in the closed hi-hat. Add in some more. Let's go grab something melodic from the end. You notice I'm not soloing and muting these tracks because there's nothing actually on the track. There's no sampler on the track. These are just MIDI channels, and all the MIDI's being grabbed by the channel map and sent to the appropriate channel. And it's all getting collected up here by this note FX layer and all these note receiver devices we have in each channel. And that's what's passing on Bitwig. So you can't, I'm passing it on to Maschine. So you can't just solo mute here. You have to solo mute inside Maschine itself if you're playing from the MIDI here. So of course, at this point, you know, it's pretty obvious that your big advantage is that you can now edit these MIDI clips and do all the kinds of tricks I was showing you earlier. Like we could make this hi-hat pattern, for example, be much more random. Instead of every single hit triggering every time, we could just set its randomness to something like 56%. And now if we play this pattern, see how the hi-hat's much more random and varied and interesting now. It's not just robotic and monotonous and doing the same thing every pass through the pattern. Okay, so that's a little preview of what's to come. Let's talk about, one other thing about loading kits. By default, if you set up 5 groups with the correct routing on each group, so that you can just load kits into up to all 5 of these groups, all the routing will work correctly when you drag MIDI over to Bitwig and modify the MIDI or play different combinations of MIDI or whatever. But what if you want to add a 6th group? Well, just remember the pattern. If you just click this, it's got the wrong routings by default. So you don't need to remember and manually set this up. Just go grab any existing group, like even one that's populated with a kit already. Just copy it, come over here and paste it over the new group you created. And now it does have a copy of the entire kit, but at least its routings are correct. And then you can just overwrite this with a different kit entirely. So if we turn on our browser again and, grab this kit and drop it in here, now we have a new kit on here and the routings are all correct and everything's going to work the way we expect it to. Okay, so now that we've done this basic Bitwig setup, the Maschine setup, we've kind of done a quick test to make sure that MIDI coming out of Bitwig is correctly triggering Maschine when it doesn't have any patterns loaded up or activated. Now we're going to kind of do the final stretch and kind of finalize this instance of Maschine and this instance of Bitwig, and then we're going to save it as a project template because ultimately you want to be able to use this like a template. First, let's talk about cleaning up this instance of everything so we can turn it into a template. I think the first thing I'm going to do is leave these original patterns in here from my first kit that I chose. And you could change the kits and re-export a set of patterns for the kits. That's fine, but we'll just pretend we're going to build a template starting with this kit as like the main sound in this one. I'm going to get rid of this extra kit that I made. Right, so I just want 5 groups. And our goal here is to, let's see, we exported pattern 1. We're going to turn off all the MIDI clips that are being played from Bitwig so that it's not trying to interfere with things. We're just going to work internally in Maschine again. And I'm going to make this view a little bigger so we can see everything and work with everything. And we're just going to kind of populate these other 5 kits with something that kind of sort of works with this first kit. All right, so let's kind of reset this kit by turning everything on again. And we're just going to find some other kits that kind of work with this pattern. We'll go from there. That one's okay. Drag that in here. Let's go find another one. And again, you just you can even sort of hear these over the top of anything else you're playing. You can use this volume control here to turn up the preview a little bit if you want. I'm just looking for kits that are going to mesh rhythmically, not necessarily in the same key, but just rhythmically, because a lot of times you want one kit's melodic elements to dominate, and you're going to use the other kits mostly for making the rhythmic structure a little more intense or aggressive, or changing the feel or the beat in various ways, kind of like you heard me do at the beginning of this video. So don't worry too much if a given kit is in a totally different key, because you can fix that once you pull it into Bitwig. Just look for things that kind of match up in terms of feel, textures, and sounds you might want to, use together and have as a starting point for your new template, just to remind you how Maschine works, and have everything set up to give you a good starting point to change it out with other patterns from other kits, from other expansions. Okay, so I'm just going to keep going here. Okay, and we're getting a little noisy. Let's just make sure I'm soloing only this one kit. Not that one. That can make for a good laid back section against this more driving beat, right? And then you switch to this feel. Yeah, that could be fun. Let's drag that one in. And then let's go find one more. Ooh, that's nice. Now that might be in a different key, but that's okay, because again, we're just looking for feel. So I don't know, there might be a little too much push and pull there. It's a little too laid back. Maybe, I don't know, we'll play with it in a second. This will be the next part I show you. So we've got 5 candidate kits with a bunch of different patterns. And now let's see if we can find a little starting position where they all work together somehow. And again, your idea is to create a starting template. Just, if you haven't dusted this off and used this machine in a month or two, and then you decide you want to go dig around a machine for some loops to use in a project, you've got a starting point to work with that kind of reminds you how everything should sound and work together. So obviously, one of the problems is if we just pick the first pattern from every kit, and most of these patterns have, as you can see, melodic elements at the bottom, right? They've all got a bass line. Well, that one's not. That's mostly just a drum kit. That's why there's only one pattern there. This one has a bass line, right? So I've got potentially 4 different totally competing melodic bass lines, and that's never going to work, right? So typically what you'll do is you'll set it up so that one pattern dominates and has the main melodic elements. And then on all the other kits, you'll just literally mute. some of the melodic elements and just focus on the drum elements and see how the drum elements interplay, right? So we're going to walk through one by one and just kind of see what each of these kits sound like and decide what to turn off. And then we're going to balance them against each other so that you can just stack them all up and they'll sound good, kind of like I demoed at the very beginning of the video. So let's go walk through that process real quick. So we're going to start with this kit and it's soloed. Right, now let's see what this kit has to offer. Now, maybe those melodic instruments could work with this kit, but it sounds like it might be a little busy. Let's add this one back in and see what it sounds like. Now, almost all those melodic elements work together. It's a little crowded. I might turn off one or two of these, but the simple way to go, if you don't want to bother with that, is just look for a pattern that's only drums. Like, usually the first patterns are the main hook or theme of each kit. And then as you work downward, a lot of the lower level patterns are just little sparse drum grooves, or in this case, a top pattern, or maybe this is just some melodic stabs. Let's see what this one sounds like. Let's turn this one off. See, that could work against this main pattern from kit 1. Let's see how that sounds together. Right, that's not bad. It's a little loud compared to the main kit, but that's okay. We could fix that. Or we could just pick up something that has a basic drum beat stuff and a few top sounds. See, that sounds nicely aggressive. If I mute this and we hear just the basic kit, it drops out. Right, so we're adding a little more density, a little more rhythmic variation just by adding in this one drum pattern. So you just kind of poke around until you find something that meshes well with the main kit. I'm going to solo this. And I want something slightly melodic. I don't want the bass line. I kind of like this. Ooh, that's fun too. Let's see how that sounds with it. Nah, I want this melodic line. So we're going to work with this. And now we're just going to balance the overall level of this new group against the original group. We're going to want to take this down. These sounds are a little too loud in the context of this particular mix. So now we add these in. We're going to go to the group tab. We're going to go to the sound, audio, and I'm sorry, group. Where's my group output? Group audio, right? So if you work from the group audio tab, this is like your master fader for the entire group right here. Okay, so we're just going to fader this down a little bit to blend it into the overall sound of the first pattern. So let's double click this to put it back at 0. See, it's a little too loud. So let's fader it all the way down and then slowly bring it up until it sounds balanced against what's going on in kit A1. See, now that sounds nicely balanced, about 4.9 dB down, right? So now we'll move on to the next kit. Let's see what we've got here. We'll solo it first. that kicks ass. That sounds great. So again, let's balance this against it. We'll just drop the fader down and bring it back up into this pattern. Now we'll bring in the other texture and see how all three of them sound together. Right, that sounds great. So we're on a good track now. So these three are working really well together. Let's move on to this one. Oh, that's so tasty. What else have we got? Okay, so in this case, I liked a lot of the melodic elements, but we've already got quite a bit of melody going on between these first three kits. So I want to keep this one sparse. I really like the snap of the kick and the snare on this one, and the kick kind of syncopation pattern going on. So I feel like it adds a nice additional kind of aggressive forward texture on top of the basic kit. So let's hear all four of them together. See how they're gelling so far. See, I just want a little more bite from this kit. So you just toggle them on and off, you adjust the level, you go back and check different combinations. And we're just going to do this for kit E1 now. So we're going to solo this one. Let's make sure we're on the right one to adjust the right fader for the entire group. That's a little busy because there's a lot going on here. Let's look for a more sparse pattern. I kind of like this bass stab against this one, so let's see how this sounds against the A1 pattern. Nah, two basses fighting, not usually a good idea. Let's go back to this and find one that doesn't have a bass pattern. We have plenty of rhythmic stuff going on, so let's just bring in these for some little additional flavor elements. Yeah, they're too similar. Let's try this one. Mm. Yeah, I don't know about that one. Let's try it. I think without the melodic elements, this one might be interesting. Let's look for a pattern that doesn't have any melodic stuff in it. There we go. I'm gonna mute the kick drum. I'm gonna mute the main kick snare and hat elements and just go with these kind of mid-rangey perk sounds, just for an extra layer. All right, let's try all 5 of them turned on at the same time. Okay, that's not bad. Again, this is just a demo. If I were really setting up a real combination of kits for a real project, of course, I'd spend a little more time on this. But you can see the rough strokes here, right? We've got our bass sound. It's at full volume. And then every other kit, or group rather, is balanced a little bit lower against the main kit because they're just filling in different areas. And you just look for things that are concordant and mute things that are too busy or disharmonious or whatever the case may be, and just find a combination of patterns that works. And so now we've done this basic rebalancing of the respective audio levels among our 5 kits. And we're pretty much ready to now get ready to save all this as a template. And we can start with this every time we want to work with Maschine. And we can just pull this up and blow all these patterns away or just overwrite them with new patterns for different sounds we want, right? But at least when you start it up and fire it up, everything's at the right overall volume. And so having this much populated is generally a good idea for a template. And now if we were to turn off all the patterns, if I leave all 5 of these kits active, which they are because they're bright and they're lit up, that means these MIDI patterns will get sent to all 5 kits at the same time, and we're going to have cacophony. Check it out. See, it's trying to play to all of these at one time, and that's definitely not what we want. So what we want to do is make sure we've soloed just the kit we want to play, you know, where we got these patterns from, and now we'll only play on kit A1. And what I like to do is rename this scene to say, hey, all this MIDI came from scene 1. And since I grabbed it out of pattern 1, I like to rename the specific scene itself as A1.P1. So that tells me it's this set of MIDI is from A1 pattern 1. And we'll get more into exporting MIDI in a minute. I just like to have at least one set of MIDI in here to remind me, again, how things work, to test to make sure everything's working and routed correctly. Like if I turn off all the patterns here and make sure only one kit's enabled and I play all my MIDI clips, That's what I expect to hear. That means all my routing is good. If I come over here to the Machine Lab channel and look through here, you're going to see MIDI coming through all these channels. Right? And I can also test my pitching. We got a chord, a hit, sound effects, a bass, chord, chord, chord. So everything from 9 through 16 is very much pitched. So we can come over here and do 16 through 9, turn the pitching on, and then let's play with the pitch knob and watch what happens when we play from here and we've turned off all the internal pattern playback inside of Maschine itself. Now, like with any sampler, some of these are samples that we're pitching up or down, and you can only pitch samples so far. Some of the instruments, like the bass instruments and so on, they'll do a little bit better at pitching pretty far outside their original range. But, you know, every combo you have, every kit you have is going to be different in this regard. You just have to experiment with what works. But the point is, I can open up this project template. Everything's pitching correctly. Everything's being routed correctly if I'm playing from Bitwig. And that's what we want, is just have a quick way to test and know and make sure everything's working correctly before you start getting down to business and fleshing out some real ideas in earnest. So now that we're in this state, I like to turn off all the drum clips, re-enable the original pattern that the drum clips came from. I've got this column name to remind me which kit and which pattern is in this column from the exported MIDI. And we're good to go to make this into a template. Now, there is one last extra credit thing you could do if you want. I made a special template in Bitwig that are the Maschine track colors. And I'll share the image with you that you can use to do this for yourself. You basically click this button, and down here where it says import from image, you can just find the image I give you and open it, and it will create this new user preset for colors that looks exactly like this. Look for a Dropbox link in the description for the video. Trust my Dropbox, it'll be okay. And then once you have this, you can, if you want, optionally color all these clips, and they're in exact order from top to bottom, matching exactly what we have in Maschine, going from orange through yellow, green, purple, and fading into pink and red at the bottom, right? So this is channel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through 9 across the top, then 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 across the bottom. Don't worry about the middle row. That's just something Bitwig interpolated from the basic colors I gave it. So we could go through here and, you know, before we save this as a final template, we can set up these colors to match what you actually see in Maschine itself. And then everything will look a lot nicer when you're bringing your clips in. Right? So now that we have that, again, if I were to delete these entirely, it's going to always remember these colors and apply them to whatever you slide up into this set of MIDI tracks. So if we were to export this all one more time, right, drop it on the first slot, they actually show up down here with Bitwig's kind of default color choices, but those will all get overwritten in just a second. Select all 16 of them, slide them up here, and boom, it looks exactly like it does in Maschine. Makes it a little easier to, you know, tell what's what compared to Maschine and the colors in Maschine, right? So you could do that as a optional extra credit. So we've got these, we've got this, we could collapse all this up. So most of the time those are out of the way. We have our Note FX layer, we have Maschine ready to rumble. And now we just want to save this whole thing as a template. So, that's pretty basic Bitwig stuff. And save it, and it's done, right? And so from now on, whenever you want to work with Maschine, you can open it up in a new template. So here's the one I just made. Bitwig's got a little bug where it hides your original templates until you restart Bitwig. It's kind of sucky, but oh well. And so now I've got this template loaded. We can activate the engine, and I have a new project ready to just start workshopping in. I can overwrite Machine's current patterns with new patterns, and I could delete this MIDI and just start from scratch and start building out MIDI clips of different patterns I want to get into Bitwig and modify and adjust. Okay, now we're going to talk about the workflow of getting MIDI out of Maschine into Bitwig, tweaking the MIDI, and then bouncing the MIDI into useful stems that you can bring into your project. So I'm going to go back to the original setup I had going, which was this more mid-tempo set of Maschine patterns. And you've already seen me kind of demo some of these MIDI clips, but we'll pick a new pattern I haven't brought out and bounced yet and show you the process from the beginning. But the goal that we're going for here is to, for any given kit, like I've got some bounces out of my A1 kit and a bounce out of my C1 kit. For any given combination of MIDI clips, you might make some changes and edits and do some tricks to them. And then you're going to bounce each of these combinations into a set of audio stems. And typically, the typical stems you want for the fastest workflow, but also the most flexibility, kind of a good balance there. If you bounce every single sound from every single kit, you're going to end up with so many clips and so many stems, and it's going to be impossible to keep them straight, right? So it's simplest in the long run to just bounce out from each kit that you set up and you like the combo of, and you want to have that stem to use in your real project. Bounce out a kick stem that's just that main kick on sound number 1. Bounce out the snare that's just the main snare on sound number 2. Then find all your top sounds that aren't melodic, but they're just drum tops. Bounce them out to their own stem. And then finally, all of your melodic sounds, like in this particular kit A1 and in pattern 1 from that, the tambourine and the bass were tonal enough and melodic enough that I wanted to transpose those to a different key. And those have been bounced to their own stem that's just melodic. So if we make sure that Maschine is in kind of a neutral state and not actually playing any pattern by itself, right? Like I'm running the transport and we don't hear anything, but I'm just going to be hearing kit number 1 because it's the only active kit. Let's pull it over to the side here. And so here's, again, Maschine itself is idle right now. I could play the MIDI into it, like this chunk here. I could play just the kick MIDI, right? Or I could play just the snare MIDI, and so on. I could play any combination of MIDI, but ultimately I've bounced all those already into individual stems that sound like this. Here's the kick by itself. And I've added my drum fattener on here that I showed you at the beginning of the video, so it sounds a little different. and we'll turn off Infiltrator for a minute so it doesn't sound quite so different. Right, so these are stems that I can work with now. And it's much easier to bring these 4 things into my project than to bring 16 exploded out individual discrete sounds, right? Trust me, I've done that from like 4 or 5 different machine kits into a project. It was a nightmare because there were so many different samples to keep track of, right? So it's easier to work with stems. Now, there are going to be some occasions where you might prefer to work with 1 or 2 very specific melodic sounds because they're useful by themselves. So this C1 kit and pattern is a good example of that. Let's activate the C1 kit and solo it. Let's go to pattern number 3. Yeah, I pulled it from pattern number 3. And see, this is why I named these. It's like, here's the kit. Here's the specific pattern and some other little nomenclature I use to tell me whether it's been transposed up or down. Like this says I'm using kit C1, pattern number 3, and I've transposed the melodic elements of pattern 3 down by 3 semitones. This is just shorthand for me. And I even put comments over in Bitwig's comment field, like for the pattern, the main kit itself, I say, okay, look, I looked at the melodic stuff in it, and I can tell that the original key is F Phrygian. And I also noted that the patterns, the actual MIDI patterns for the kick and the snare are identical across all 5 of these kit C patterns. It's like the kick and snare is the same in every single one. So that's useful because then I don't have to bounce them out 5 different times. I can just bounce them once and reuse them. Et cetera, et cetera. So just, I use these comment fields to make little notes about what I've done. Like, so these particular set of MIDI notes, I've transposed them down by -3 semitones on every single track except for track 2 and 4. And that's how I remember what to do over in Maschine when I want to reset up the pitching to play with this set of stems correctly, right? I make notes in Bitwig. Not anywhere else, just right here where I need them. So I'm going to play this set of MIDI patterns now to correspond with pattern 3 over here in Maschine. And according to my notes that I took, I'm going to pitch down every single track except for 2 and 4 so that it will sound the way I want it to, right? So I'm going to come over here and reset the pitches. I'm going to pitch down literally the kick. Everything except 2 or 4 is what my notes say, right? So for whatever reason, the snare and the, what's on number 4, an open hi-hat didn't need to be pitched. They were atonal enough. So let's turn all the pitching on for all the other channels. Now everything's pitched down except for 2 and 4. Little notes that I put here in the comment field. So now if I play Maschine itself, you're going to hear it in the original key of F, right? But when I play my own MIDI and I turn off the pattern inside of Maschine so that it's just a passive sampler now on kit number C, if I play it here, it's all going to be pitched down 3 semitones. Which means it's in the same pitch as, for example, the patterns from kit number 1. Like I could play these audio stems at the same time I'm playing these MIDI stems to see if, they blend well. So let's try that. Now it's a little busy with all the drums and stuff, but if, for example, I solo the bass line being played by the MIDI here in kit C against the bounced stem of the bass line from kit A, you can hear they're in key together, right? Okay, so This is why we do this pitching. It's to make kits match up. It's to make sounds match up. I would never play these two bass lines at the same time in a real project, but I might alternate between them. Like one section of the song might use this busier kind of bouncy bass line from here. And then another section might use that more rolling triplet-based bass line for like a tension section or intro or, some weird C section, right? So I want to have this bounce. I won't necessarily ever play them at the same time, but it's useful to have both of them, and they're both in the same key. They'll both work in the same song. I can get creative with my song arrangement, right? But the thing I want to point out is that of all these sounds in pattern number 3, when I play it from Maschine itself, the pluck sound is interesting, but it's also very low in the mix. Like you can barely hear it. See if you can pick out the pluck. Oops, so let's make sure that sample's off. Right? It's very low in the background, which is one way to mix it. But I might want to use that pluck as a more upfront lead sound, especially in an intro or a breakdown or something, right? So I don't want a stem that has the pluck sound and the bass sound combined at a certain balance against each other, because I may want to use the pluck alone, or I might want to use the bass alone. So in this case, I'm going to break my usual rule of exporting just one stem with all my melodic elements. And instead, I'm going to export the pluck by itself, and I'm going to export the bass line by itself, right? So that's the thing to keep in mind, is sometimes you just want stems, but sometimes you're going to want individual sounds. And now let's talk about how to do that. Although, I guess, let me kind of show you what this sounds like. So here's the actual bounced stems, and they're balanced slightly differently. They're all transposed down to D. The pluck is much louder in the mix now, and I've changed the overall tonality of the pluck by running it through Murda Melodies, which does some really fun things to it. Right? That's not the original pluck. This is. Okay, so again, I want to work fast. I don't want to do a lot of hand editing and layering. I tend to grab my stems with the original sound straight out of Maschine. Maybe I'll rebalance their individual levels, and then I'll tend to use plugins or other devices in Bitwig to then change the tonality and timbre and feel of these sounds in the audio stem tracks. And it's just there if I want it. I can have Murda Melodies on or off. And then again, a really strong example of that was this bass line over here. Right? It's totally different than what came out of Maschine. And now I have these two kind of sets of sounds I can work with. Now, maybe you don't hear how those can fit together, but I could totally make a song with both of those, all of those stems, and be flipping back and forth between the 2 and the 3 feel. I could have a lot of fun with that, but it depends on what you hear in your own brain when you hear sounds like these. So let's go through the exercise one time now that I've kind of given you the overview of what you're trying to do. You're trying to get to these stems that you can then drag as a group or individual tracks or even individual clips out of your template, your side project where you workshop all your stuff from Maschine and make these stems. Then you want to pull these stems into your real project and just use them as audio stems, audio samples, wherever you want your arrangement, whatever makes sense. You could build up an arrangement around these clumps or groupings, or you could just use individual sounds and throw them in for a little spice here, a little spice there, a little lead instrument here, a little bass line there, whatever you want, right? But let's go through the exercise one more time with one different kit. I really like this Freya kit, so let's listen to this pattern here, and let's make sure all of my audio clips are off, and we're just listening to Maschine itself. Right, so this is a pretty full little kit. We have some melodic sounds here. If we solo these, let's see, synth, synth. So these three seem to be the most melodic elements in it. Let's see what they sound like by themselves. I guess there's no synth on this pattern. And this bass, this monarch almost sounds percussive. Let's listen to this. Actually, we don't even need to transpose the monarch. The bass is the only thing that's really tonal, it seems like. Right? That's clearly in some key. Let's see what key it's in. Again, it's sometimes hard to eyeball it here in Maschine because it's so tiny. It's incredibly tiny. Yeah, see, where the hell am I? That's all in C, right? C3. So I know that if I'm in the key of D in my project, I've transposed everything to D so far. I'm going to want to push this up 2 semitones, right? Let's see if there's anything else here that's specifically tonal and actually has some sounds on it. We'll go back to the clip view. We'll check out this one. Nope, that's not tonal. Nope. 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 That's got a little bit of a tone, but it's pretty neutral. That's got a tone, but again, it's artificial and weird and metallic enough. It probably doesn't need to be tuned up or down from the original. Nope, that's not tonal. Nope. The kick has a pretty strong tuning to it. It's probably been adjusted to sound really good in the key of C, especially with this bass line. We'll turn both those on, listen to them together. Yeah, this kick's definitely been tuned to something harmonically consonant with the key of C. So if I'm gonna push up the bass by 2 semitones, I probably also want to push up the kick to match, right? So I just made my little analysis of this track. Tracks 15 and 1 should be pitched up. Everything else does not need to be pitched, right? So this is the analysis you do. And I'm going to do pattern 4 from kit B1. So right over here, I'm going to actually put a scene in between here, an empty scene, because I've got all my kit A, kit C. I'm going to put kit B stuff right here. So I'm going to rename this to B1. And I'm going to make a note that its original key is C. And that bass line didn't have any actual melody to it. It was just a pedal tone on C. So I'm just going to put a little thing there to show that it's not necessarily major or minor. And what else do I usually put? Yeah, I usually just put the original key there. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is on this scene, I'll remind myself that I'm doing a MIDI capture or export of B1, P4 for pattern 4. And I know that I want to bump everything up by 2 semitones, everything tonal. So that's just at a glance. I know I've transposed these MIDI clips, or I need to transpose them by 2. And now I'm just going to go grab, and I'm also going to make a note. I decided that sound number 1 and sound number 15 were the 2 elements that needed to be pitched. So over here in the column here, I'm going to say something like pitch +2 on sounds 1 and 15. Key is D, not D minus, but a little bit of space there. Otherwise, you could read that as D minor. So just a reminder of how I want to pitch these sounds. And so then I can come over to Maschine itself and set that up real quick. I'm going to double click this to set it back to center. Let's see, 15 and 1. I'll leave 15 turned on. Toggle all these off. Go 1. And again, this may look complex, but believe me, it's so much easier than editing the MIDI. And then deciding you didn't like that and going back and re-editing the MIDI and all kinds of crazy stuff. It's much easier to experiment and check your hunches just by setting this up and controlling the pitch this way, right? Okay, so now we're going to export the MIDI. We're going to drop it into this column right here. So I make sure I'm in the clip mode, this button right here, so I'll get the entire kit in one go. Drag it out, drop it onto slot number 1, let go, scooch this out of the way for a minute. So here's the 16 tracks it brought in. Select them all, slide them up onto the tracks where they should live. Then I can get rid of these because they were just kind of temporary for pulling them in from Maschine. And now I've got a new B1, C5, Scene 5, and oh, I lost my info here. What the heck? I must not have hit enter. B1, P4, +2, enter. Okay. Okay, so now that I brought the MIDI in, it can be helpful to get rid of the empty clips. Like if I turn everything on again here, you can see that sound number 5 doesn't have any MIDI in this pattern. And sound number 14 doesn't seem to have any MIDI, so it can be a little cluttered and sometimes confusing to just have a wall of color, especially if some of these are empty and don't actually have any MIDI in them. So what I do is I just select the first clip and I kind of keep my peripheral vision here as I go downward, and I look for a blank spot here, which means there's no MIDI. So I'm just going to keep clicking until I see a blank spot. No MIDI on that track. Keep clicking. And out of the corner of my eye, am I going to see any other blank spots? There's another blank spot. Get rid of that one. And so now I've got clips left that are just MIDI, things with actual MIDI on them. And now I can come over here to Maschine Shop and set my pitch +2 to get it up into the key of D. So let's make sure we've turned off the pattern here, but the kit is active and all the sounds are active, right? Nothing's muted. And then I'm going to play this. So now we're driving it from our MIDI in Bitwig, and then now I'm going to take the pitch up 2 to get this into the key of D. And I'll double check how many semitones this is by going to channel 15. And we'll just double check that we have 2 blue dots here. Yep, there's 2. If I go a little further, you'll see it's 3. But this is 2. So now we're in the key of D. And we've only transposed the pitch for 15 and for, oops, I wanted to do channel 1 too. 15 and 1. Okay. And if we listen to the kick and the bass together, we should hear that they sound in tune with each other. Right, that's perfect. Is there anything else discordant sounding, like that needs to be tuned, but maybe isn't yet tuned? Let's find out. This one? I'm going to pitch that one up too as well. Let's go over to channel 12. Yeah, I think that's going to help. Much better. See, and the beauty of doing your pitching this way is you can just test. You could just like, if you don't know where the sound's coming from, you could just blindly punch buttons until you go, wait, that's a lot better because you changed the pitch of it, right? Like I could tell this noise sound was off. If I don't pitch it, it sounds kind of inharmonious. But if I turn it on, and you could just, you know, if you really weren't sure, if you didn't have a good ear for this sort of thing, you could just kind of work your way to the top and try pitching everything and see if it makes a difference. Like, I don't think the snare makes any difference. So you can just test these one by one and just go with your ear, see what your ear says. You know, the point is, I don't have to go into 16 different tracks and select all the MIDI and arrow them up and arrow them down and just back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, which is what you have to do in every other DAW. You build a rack like this and it's just button on, button off, button on, button off. Something's sticking out, you find where that sound is coming from, and boom, you're done. So we've got this MIDI tuned and pitched. Now the question is, do we want to rhythmically alter anything? For this, I like to kind of look at the MIDI again, and well, we won't do it here. We'll do it in Bitwig itself, just clip by clip. So let's look at our kick MIDI first. It's pretty much a steady kick with a little driving pump at the beginning. Because it's a steady beat, there's not much room to change the syncopation here. It'll sound weird if you drop out every downbeat of every bar, so we're going to leave that one alone. Clap again is always on the backbeat, so there's not much opportunity to change the feel of this. Now the hi-hat is a straight offbeat eighth pattern. Could vary it a little bit. You know, we could select it all and kind of loosen it up a little bit by bringing it down to like 80%. Sure, why not? Hi-hats aren't super important for the main pulse. Let's check this open hi-hat. Now here we've got some syncopation going on. Let's see what this sounds like when we solo just the main hi-hat. We're going to turn everything on, and then I'm going to solo the number 3 and number 4 just to hear those two hi-hats playing off of each other. It's not worth messing with that one too much. I think it's enough that we just added a little probability to the main closed hi-hat. All right, the clap is pretty basic. Yeah, we don't want to mess with that. The perk, perk. Let's see what this sounds like. We're going to come over here to track 7 and solo it. Yeah, let's give that a little probability, just so it's not always the same every time. 80%. Let's check out the next sound. It's track number 8, 7. Let's do 8. What's this sound like? So you see how I'm soloing a lot to really zero in on things, even though every MIDI clip is playing simultaneously? Yeah. So that's providing our basic syncopation. Yeah, we can, that's kind of a counter beat line. Actually, I want to leave that pulse in there. I don't want to change that up too much. What's this sound? Okay, that's like clockwork. Let's really randomize that. Let's bring that down to 66% or thereabouts. Let's listen to this sound on track number 10. No, that's okay, and it's pretty much in the background. We don't need to mess with that. Let's solo track number 11. Now I'm spending way more time on this than I normally would because I'm just trying to show you how you think about this process. Here's the glitch on track 11. Yeah, that's too regular. So let's go ahead and set the probability on that too. Let's bring it down to about 75. This noise. That's irregular enough and provides an interesting counterpoint. I might take maybe, let's see, I'm going to do this thing that's kind of on the offbeat, the ones that aren't on the 2. And I'll make those have a slightly lower probability, like 75 or so. And then the crash, that's just one crash at the beginning. We'll leave that. Actually, you know what? Sometimes crashes like that sound better if they're not the same every single time. Stick that down to about 66%. And then the baseline, let's hear that one. All right. The important pulses are the first 2 in every bar. Bump, 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 bump. And those other ones, right? These 2 here, and these 2 here, and these 2 here. They're an important kind of counterbeat, but they don't need to be robotically the same every single time. So I'm going to click just these kind of intro ones. And let's see, is that the same thing? Da, da, dum, dum, da, da, dum, dum, da, da, dum, dum, da, da. Yeah, these are just turnarounds. Okay, so we're going to take those and we're going to give them, we want them to be there most of the time, but occasionally just skip one just to add a little rhythmic interest. So let's try 80% on those. And now it'll sound like this. Yeah, 80% is too high. They're firing too often. Let's go select them again. I tend to find around 75 to 66% is the sweet spot. Let's try 66%. Yeah, that's a little more interesting. It's going to be different on every pass through. So, you know, we've walked through pretty much all these. I won't bother with the 16th one because it's just a little spat. And let's hear how this sounds now that we've adjusted some probabilities. Let's turn everything on. See, nice and spongy, different every time. It's definitely not the same as what's in the original kit. So, we've put our own stamp on it. We've made it our own. We've made it more rhythmically interesting. Now the trick is to bounce this out. So here's where it gets a little nuanced, right? We've added probability to some of these tracks, and we can just quickly flip through them and see which ones we add a probability to. We did to this one. And a trick I use is I'll literally rename the clip with a P in front of it to show that I changed the probability on that clip. And then this one doesn't have any probability. That one doesn't. This one does. So I'm going to rename this one. Go to the beginning, put in a P, a little space, hit enter. Did I forget to do it for this one? Yes, I did. Gotta remember to hit enter. P space, enter. Okay. This one, that one. This one. This one. This one. And the baseline definitely has some probability in it. All right, so I've got quite a few tracks where I changed the probability to make it a little spongy. So what I'm going to do here is bring in a new empty scene. And here's the trick, and this is a very Bitwig specific thing, okay? This is an amazing feature of Bitwig and the way that it handles probability. So when you have any MIDI notes in a clip that have any of these operators baked into them, whether it's probability or repeats or other tricks that you can do with operators, it's going to be completely random every time you hit the play button, and that's not a good thing when you're trying to have a predictable project and things sound the same every time you play through a certain section. So we need to somehow freeze this probability so that every time we play it, it will be random, but random in exactly the same way from section to section, bar to bar, right? Because you need that predictability when you're fine-tuning and detailing your full mix as you're getting into final mix down and final arrangement, right? You don't want it to be completely random each time or you're just going to get messed up. So Bitwig has this great notion of if you've got clips in the clip launcher that have some probability baked into them, like this one, it has this right-click option called expand. And when you expand that clip, it says, well, how many times do you want to bounce this MIDI clip out and then lock in the probability? So I'm going to do this, let's see, how long is this bar? This is a 4-bar loop. Yeah, I'm going to bounce in 8 repeats and end up with 32 bars of MIDI. So I'm just going to do this and leave these blank by default. Click this, and all it does is in the next available slot, it prints a burned version of this clip. So now if I click on this, there's no more probability on any of these bass notes, and I've got 32 bars. But this has 1 round of probability baked in for 8 cycles of that 4-bar loop, and it's just locked in now. If I zoom in on any of these clips, there's no more probability on any of them, right? They don't have any little dice symbols on them. And this is great because now it'll always play the same way every single time. So now let's do the same thing to our other clips that have probability baked into them. So we're going to go to this clip, right click on it, expand it out 8 bars. We can also just multi-select clips that have probability and do them all in one go. Isn't that nice? Okay. So we have the probability bounces. Each of these are going to be 32 bars long. One of the reasons we bounce this out is so you could play through one time, and if you hear some sort of probability event that isn't quite right, you can now manually adjust it in the final MIDI. Like, if a certain note didn't happen and you really felt like a note needed to happen for some reason, you could just manually add it in, and now it's part of the corrected probability, if you will, but I almost never ever feel like there's a need to do that, except maybe in something really important like a kick or snare line, and I just feel like some accent or special hit needs to be there that isn't, and I'll put that in manually to adjust what the expansion did. But for the most part, you can consider these as good enough. Now they're 32 bars each, and what we're going to do is the other clips that didn't have any probability on them, we're going to multi-select them and just slide them over as copies into this new scene. So I'm just going to multi-select them, then hold down Control and slide them over. That makes a copy. And so now we have the original 4-bar loops, some of which have probability baked in. And then over here, we have a combination of 4-bar loops and 32-bar loops with the probability baked in. And I like to change the P at the beginning to X to show that these have been expanded. And they're no longer the original probability, but they are the expanded set of bars. And again, these are just little visual shortcuts to help me keep things straight when I'm looking at a big file full of little stems like these. 2 more. Okay, and up here, I'm going to give this the same name just to remind me where it came from, what it is. Now we have a set of clips with variety and probability burnt in. And some of them are 32 bars, some of them are 4 bars, but we can now burn these into a set of stems. And what we're going to do is create a set of rows for this B1 pattern now. See, I've got some A1 rows and some C1 rows. I'm just going to start right here under, actually, I'll do this the easy way. I'll grab these 4 rows and just duplicate them. And then I'm going to get rid of the clips that are on these 4 duplicated rows. And I'm going to name these to be B1 kick, B1 snare, B1 tops, B1 melodic. So now I've got a set of rows for all my clips that are going to come out of the B kit. And I also want to make sure that I've take off any special replacer devices or whatever I might have here, right? These came from my A kit. Okay, so I've got these 4 new tracks ready to go, ready to put stems into. And I'm going to be bouncing this out into a kick, snare, tops, and melodic stem, right? So here's how we do this. We're going to open up the arranger view, scroll this over so we can see the pattern we want to bounce out, which is this one. And we're just going to grab the entire scene, drag it over into the arranger timeline, and let go. And so we have 32 bars. Now, we have to click this button to kind of enable playback from the arranger. And you'll notice that some of these have these little dotted lines in them. That dotted line means they're repeating. This will be a little more visible maybe if I expand these out a bit. Over here, it's 32 bars long, but it's 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, and 4. Same for the snare, right? Everything down until we get to this one that was expanded, which doesn't have any of those little white divider lines. That means this is a full 32 bar pattern. So the point is, you know, you drag a scene out of mixed clip lengths into the arranger timeline, and you just get the total longest length of whatever's in this clip launcher. This is kind of unique to Bitwig. I don't know if Ableton works quite the same way. So we now have this thing we can bounce. So now it's time to see how long the longest reverb and decay tail across all these stems might be. We're going to bounce this entire pattern as one combined audio stem. So every clip is activated, and we're going to select a region of time on the clip itself. You don't want to just select the clip and nothing else, because it'll stop bouncing right at the end of the clip, and it's going to cut off any reverb tails that are happening. So what we need to do is bounce a section of time. And you can't multi-select or bounce individual clips because they don't have any sound generators on the track that they exist on. All the sound generation is happening at the top level here on the machine shop group, where Maschine itself actually lives. Okay, so we're going to bounce this whole track, and we're going to bounce this section of time. I'm going to switch to the time cursor and just grab an extra 2 bars past the end of all the clips, right out to here. You Control B, pre-fader, 32-bit, no dither, right? Just bounce it, always 32-bit. And here's the new gray track it's bouncing into. It's getting ready to do the bounce. It's deciding what to do. Okay, now it's actually running the bounce. And it's bouncing through the master and then coming back up here and writing this track out. Wait for this to finish. All right, and now we're done. We'll take a better look at this gray colored track and see how far the tail goes out. See, here's our tail at the end, extending past it. We're going to zoom in really, really close on the timeline and make sure that tail's really dead. Yeah, that's kind of still got a pretty long reverb tail. It hasn't quite finished here yet, so I'm going to go even further than 2 bars just to really make sure I get all that tail down to 0. We could go into the audio editor and zoom in this way, and you can see the tail's getting cut off there, right? So, you could go that far and then just add a fade, but that's just more work. So I just think it's easier to just get all the tail and make sure we're going all the way to silence. So I can see we're pretty close to silence. I'm going to delete this track entirely because that was just a test bounce. We're going to come back to the beginning of the timeline and zoom everything in. Scroll to the top. Let's squish everything up again, just to make it easier to see everything at once. So let's go a little further out. Instead of 2 bars, I'm going to go 4 bars with the tail. And now we're ready to do our bounces. And we'll capture all the tails that might be there. So the first thing you want to do is just select every clip, deactivate. And then the first thing we want to bounce is just the kick. There probably won't be any tails on the kick, but never hurts to grab it anyway and double check. We can edit that out later. We're going to activate only the kick track. Again, we're going to select from the group bar itself. So we're actually bouncing a section of time through the Maschine track, the track where Maschine lives. We're going to go out 4 extra bars in the timeline, and let's just bounce that kick now. Now we have a bounce, and the first thing we're going to do is drag it into our B1 kick track in the column that we're bouncing from, which is this column right here, B1 pattern 4. So I'm going to take this clip and drag it over here to the B1 column, put it on the B1 kick slot, and see it's already picking up my color. And if we double click on it to see what it looks like inside, sure enough, you can see there's no extra tails there. Those kicks end before the end of bar 33. So we're just going to shorten this up to exactly 32 bars. We're dragging these over, and now we have a 32 bar pattern that's solid for the kick. And we're good to go for the next one, right? So now we're going to come up here and delete the arranger track that we bounced into. We're going to deactivate kick, activate the snare, go to our time cursor, select time on the group track, out 4 bars past the end, Control B, enter. See, this is taking a lot of time because I'm talking it out with you. When I do this, it's just super fast. The longest part is the bounce on these big 32 bar expansions. Okay, so now we have a snare track. Let's scroll down a little bit. Let's take the snare and drag it into the snare track on the B1 under that column we're exporting from. Get rid of the bounced snare track. Come back up. Deactivate. Now we're going to grab all of our top sounds. Now, the only tonal sound that was in here was actually the bass line. This one here is also just a percussive sound, even though it's coming out of a synth. It's just a white noise coming out of Monarch. So I'm going to activate all of these, and we're going to bounce all of these as a group into a tops stem. So same thing here, switch to the timeline cursor, select 4 bars out past the end of the group clip, up on the group channel, Control B, bounce, waiting for the bounce to end. Scroll down and drag this into the tops slot. Get rid of the track. All of these are deactivated. Now the last one I want is the melodic track, which in this case is just this bass line. Activate it. Timeline. Grab 4 bars out past the end of the selection. Bounce it. Take this track and put it here in the melodic slot. Okay. Get rid of this, don't need it anymore. We're going to rename these, double check again. Each clip, the bass line doesn't have, or the kick doesn't have any tails on it. The snare also does not have any tail on it, so we can just drag this into exactly 32 bars. And that one's ready to go. The tops probably have tails. Yeah, see, so the tops have tails extending way past bar 32. In fact, even 4 bars wasn't quite enough, but it's far enough out. We're just going to go ahead and edit this clip to have a little fade on the event. I'm just going to take this fade handle and just drag it in a little bit just to make sure it truly does fade out to the end, right? And then now here, since we have a fade, we have to do a trick that experienced Bitwig people are used to, less experienced Bitwig people may not have seen. This top bar is my loop marker. These little triangles are my start and end marker. So here's what I want it to do. I want the track normally to loop to the end of 32, bar 32. And I want it to re-loop starting in the middle at bar 17, and I want it to start at clip 1. So when I play this clip in the launcher or on my timeline, the way it'll always work by default is it'll start playing from the beginning because there's no reverb blending into the beginning of the track. The first time these sounds hit, there's no reverb tail that's blended into this. It hasn't built up reverb yet, right? So you want to start from the beginning. Here's the 4-bar pattern repeating itself, repeating itself, repeating itself. And then, at the end of every one of the original 4-bar patterns, it's starting over again. But there's a reverb tail now that looks a lot like this that's blending into the start all over again. That's why here at bar 5, it looks very different than at the start of bar 1. That's because all this stuff is now blending into this area here and making it look very different. And this is how we perceive reverb in repeating patterns, right? So we want it to start without any reverb, build up reverb, and start, looping through its pattern over and over and over with the reverb blending in. And because this is a big, long 32-bar set of 8 different repeats of a 4-bar pattern, it's good enough for just most situations to just say, okay, once you've played through the first time and you hit bar 32, just start over in the middle and play these last 4 bars over and over, or these last 4 sets of 4 bars each. So 16 bars, just keep looping those over and over and over. Now it's rare in a real arrangement that you'll do any kind of looping like this. In fact, I'll probably be cutting this into a much shorter 4 or 8 bar section. But when you're testing sounds out in the launcher and you're just playing this one pattern over and over and over, like I'm about to do now, I may be playing this over and over and over for a long time while I play with sound design or arrangement or adjusting other tracks. And I just want this to loop in a natural way and contain all this reverb, this natural reverb, right? As it rolls around through its 4-bar pattern over and over and over with the variations I baked in from the expansion, right? So if we get over here to the end, it'll just loop around and start again at bar 17. And it can just keep going and going and going and going and going, right? So this is how you set up any kind of thing that has a tail, no matter how long it is. If it's got a tail, you keep the whole MIDI event, but you stop it where you want it to loop. And then you set the loop point to start in the middle of however long your audio event is, but it always starts cold from the beginning. Every time I start it, it starts from the beginning. But if this has been going and going and going and going and going, it'll just keep looping through this region over and over and over. Now, I'll just foreshadow something. If I were to ever take this bar and drag it out into the timeline, right? And we expand it out so you can actually see the tails here. You can see the tail is cut off. You have to click this button to get it over to activate it here. So I've got this in here, and if I drag it out, we can see the tail, right? If this loop button is on and I drag it out, it's just going to loop, right? It kind of doesn't respect that there's a shortcut that should loop from the bottom here. Like if I turn off looping and I do it from the bottom where this little extra loop symbol appears on my cursor, here it'll loop, but if I drag from here, it should just reveal the tail at the end of the audio event inside the clip, right? So you have to remember to turn this off, because if this is on, it'll just loop even if you drag it out from here, right? So if you ever do this and go, where's my tail? Just remember to check over here and turn off the loop, and now you can reveal the tail. And so if I wanted to make this a 4-bar loop, but still have a tail at the end so that it fades out naturally while other sounds are coming in after those 4 bars, well, there's a lot of ways you could do that. The simplest way is to open it up. Let's say I want a 4-bar loop plus a tail. Well, I probably want the tail that's actually generated at the end of these last 4 bars. So I could literally just drag the start event all the way over here and count backwards 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Looping doesn't matter because looping's turned off. And then I can come out here and just say, now show me the tail for as long as I need to, right? Maybe I just go that far and cut the fade a little more abruptly short or whatever. That's one way to do it. Let's say I wanted an 8-bar loop, and we know that I'm working with, do some undos here. Let's say I wanted an 8-bar loop, and I wanted to make sure that I was getting different sections of my variation, my pattern variation that I built in with probability. Well, there's a couple ways I could do that. I could, for example, split it at these last 2 bars, Control E, and then I could grab these first 4 bars at the beginning of the loop and split it here. And then I could grab any other 2 bars that are kind of at the start of a 2-bar pattern, like these 2 right here, and split it there. Get rid of this thing in the middle. Drag this chunk over and stick it right up next to this chunk. And now I have a 8-bar loop that ends naturally with the last 2 bars bleeding into the tail they naturally created. And now I can just drag this container inward to wherever I want it, right? Let it just ride out or cut it shorter because for whatever reason, I don't need a tail that's that long, and just drag the fade handle over and so on. So this is, once you get used to working with Bitwig audio and how audio editing works in Bitwig, the main thing you have to be aware of is if you bounce any sounds from anything that has a tail on it, a reverb tail or a delay tail, this kind of editing and positioning and revealing the tail or not, depending on whether you want it to just loop over and over or not, these are all very important things to do. Otherwise, it's not going to sound natural when you drag a clip into a project. The last thing you want is this bass line just stopping cold, or this top sound stopping cold at the end. Check it out if I actually do that. I'm going to take this fade off, and I'm going to bring this up to be exactly 4 bars. And let's just play this one section from here, and you can hear how it sounds. It just ends too abruptly. It just stops cold. And that's not going to sound good in a real project, when you use this in a real context. But if you reveal the tail, it's going to sound a lot more natural when it ends. And then so you get the fade out, the natural fade out. So, it's very important to keep track of your tails. So we have our 4 things, and we can now test how they loop. We've set up the looping. Everything should sound pretty much as we expect if we play it. Let's find out. Right? And it just sounds very natural and organic now because we built a lot of probability variation into those patterns. It doesn't sound nearly as robotic as the original machine pattern itself. So yeah, it's a little bit to wrap your head around this, to understand this. It takes a few extra steps to build in the probability to the MIDI tracks, and then expand them out to these long 32-bar bounces, and then, get your stems from those. But it's worth it because you end up at the end of this process, it really doesn't take much time once you practice it a few times. Like I said, bouncing out a stem for any particular pattern takes me 5-7 minutes to just quickly skim through the MIDI clips, decide where I want to add probability, drag it out here, make my 4 bounces, and I'm done. And that's a 5-minute process most of the time, right? And then the reason we keep both the original MIDI clips and the bounced audio in this one sort of workshop project off to the side of our real project is because if for some reason down the road you ever decide, wow, I really want that bass sound all by itself, I don't want anything else blended in with it, or I really want that one perk sound or that one weird twang or whatever it may be, you can always come back here and start over again, right? You can open up this project and say, okay, what was muted, what wasn't muted? Let's see, pitch +2 on sounds 1 and 15. Okay, great. You go set that up over here in your your pitch shifting area, right? And then you're ready to take this thing, drag it over one more time, and then say, this time I only want this clap. That's literally the only thing I want. So you can either delete or deactivate these other things, find that clap, activate it, redo your bounce, bring it in as a new item down here, like just add a new track, like, add a new audio track, call it something like, B1 clap. Okay, you really want that clap. Come over here and redo the bounce, drag the bounce into this new B1 clap slot, and boom, now you have a new stem for a single sound that you can bring into your project because midway through the project you said, gosh, I really want that one unique sound. But most of the time, you don't need that. You'll figure out when you listen to a pattern kind of what you want out of it. Most of the time, a kick, a snare, tops, and melodic stuff are the only stems you need. In rare instances, you'll go, wow, I really want that pluck all by itself. Like, listen to this pluck. That sounds really good, especially with murder melodies on it. Okay, I want that as a feature sound in my track. I mean, the minute I thought about doing this pattern, I said, I want that pluck all by itself. So when I made the stems, I made the pluck a stem all by itself. So just think about this as you work. This is a workshop project. It can get as messy as it needs to be while you're figuring this stuff out and deciding what you want to bounce. But at the end of it, you have a bunch of audio stems that you can pull into your real project and use any way you like. Okay, so we're on the last leg here. We're going to talk about actually incorporating this kind of workshop template with your real project template. So we're going to start from scratch. We're going to say that you're starting with your standard project template or a blank project. So I have my standard template with a standard loudness check track just to show you what level I tend to work at. That's about -6.5 LUFS. So let's say I started working and then I go, wow, I really want to just go grab some backing accompaniment or loops or percussive spice or whatever from Maschine. Or maybe I'm staring at a blank slate and I go, I don't know where to start. I don't have any inspiration. Either way, at some point, I might want to call up Maschine and see what I can add to this project. So the first things first, I'll save this project and give it a name like my cool project. Okay. And then I'm going to come over here to my templates, and I also have my own Maschine shop template. Here's the one I made earlier in the video, but I'll just grab my normal one. And the first thing I'll do is activate it and give it the same name as my original project so that I can see them together in my file directories, and I know that these two things belong together. So now I have these two tabs. I have my projects open at the same time. I can start workshopping ideas in here. I can go pick different kits or whatever. And I have some stems I want to use in my project, right? So there's a couple ways you can get them over here. I could just bring them all over in one go, like take this entire group and drag it into my project. Let's do that. I'm going to grab this group track, drop it onto the title of my other regular project, and let's drop it in at the very top of my pre-master group, right above drums. And boom, here's a bunch of audio stems in my main project. And I've got them in a top level bus at the same level as all my drums and tonal stuff. And maybe I want to work with these sounds in their own separate bus. That's okay. I use this concept of storage tracks and then scene tracks where I test arrangements out. So maybe the first thing I'll do is multi-select all these and drag them over to the storage tracks. So they're out of the way of where I'm workshopping ideas. Then as I need to, I can, as I'm testing out an idea, like let's use this loudness check scene as an example. I've already got some clips on here, and I've got a certain arrangement of sounds on this track here called loudness check. And let's say I want to bring over, some tops from this scene. So I just hold down Control, drag it over to make a copy, and now this is being layered into everything. That's not very exciting. Let's bring in a different set of tops instead. Let's get rid of this one. See, and I copy them out of my storage slots. That way I've always got these sitting around waiting to be used. Right? Here's this one sound. Right? So, you can just start mixing and matching these in, testing out your ideas, setting out your rough song arrangement. And then when you're ready, you just, drag these scenes out one by one into your arranger timeline and you have a song arrangement. So that's the basic idea, but there's a little bit of a nuance here. Again, remember some of these patterns had some tails on them. So when it comes time for me to take this particular scene and drag it out into my arrangement, right? We then need to do a little bit of post editing, right? Because there's tails on this set of top stems. Let's set this to play everything from the arranger timeline. Expand the tracks out so we can see what's going on here. So here's this top thing, and remember we have the tail problem. So I select this one specific track, turn that looping button off, and now I can see whether there's any tail hiding under there. And sure enough, there's a little bit of a tail. How far does it go? All the way to there, right? So now, if I'm going to use this 8-bar pattern as it is, I'm done. And then when I'm done playing everything, if I'm not looping and I let it play through the end, we're going to hear tails out of all the MIDI tracks and their synthesizers. And we're also going to hear the tail from this audio stem. You can leave this machine project deactivated, and at any given point, you could say, you know what, I want this pluck sound, and I want to bring it into my real project. So the main thing you need to have is a row to put it in. All right, so just create a new audio track, and then decide where you want to bring it into. Come over here, just grab this one pluck, come up, drop it on the title of your project to open it up, come down here, find the row, decide which storage bin you want to put it in, and just drop it in, and you're done. And so it's that easy. You just move clips back and forth out of your machine project. Doesn't have to have the audio engine activated. It's just storage you can grab from. Keep your real project active. Bring clips in, drop them into storage columns, if you will. Keep copies of them in here so you don't have to keep going back and forth. If you need to get new ideas, you can come back over to this project, start at the audio engine, find some different pattern you want to bounce stems out of. And once you've made those stems, drag them back over into your real project, activate the audio engine and keep going. And you just bounce back and forth between these two projects like this. And that's pretty much my brain dump on Maschine. I hope you found this really helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.